We ain't dead yet.
Welcome back to your boy Seth for the last video for today or this morning or whatever. Just the other video I told y'all to come out with. Meet Kevin again. This one is titled Treasury on Stimulus, Willing to Spend Whatever It Takes, which is very interesting. I have not seen this. It's 8 minutes. I don't know if we're going to watch the whole thing or not, but based off of what Kevin said, we're going to go over this a little bit. I might talk a little bit, but we're basically going to listen to what he got to say. And it's an urban experience. Let's go.
Hey everyone, Kevin here. Earlier today I came to you and broke down how Larry Kudlow, Donald Trump's economic advisor in the White House, kind of stepped back on these comments of negotiations being paused, clarifying that no, they're not paused. Negotiations are just in the informal stage right now. Well, now on top of this, to help reassure us, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin has come out to say that the Treasury Department will do whatever it takes. That is, referencing additional stimulus. And in this video, I'm going to break down for you exactly what he said, what he didn't say, what he means, and let's get right into it and do it nice and quickly. Let's go. So here's a quick play-by-play of Steve Mnuchin's interview with Chris Wallace from Fox News. Chris says, look, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says real unemployment for April is 22.8%, but that does not include 7 million who have lost their jobs since then. Aren't we talking about 25% unemployment then? Steve goes on and says, yes, we could be, and he says the numbers will probably get worse before they get better, but next year is going to be great, and we keep hearing this from the White House, right? That next year is going to be great. We closed the economy. But then Chris snaps back and says, but wait a minute, job losses are widespread. They're not just in retail and travel, in restaurants. In fact, white-collar workers are getting laid off. Government workers are getting laid off. And we have major bankruptcies at companies like J.Crew and Neiman Marcus. And the Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, it doesn't take sides like me, it's not left, right, or center, it's just trying to provide you information and insights, says that unemployment's probably still going to be 9.5% by the end of 2020. And this was a great line. Chris Wallace, which remember, Chris Wallace, Fox News, they tend to lean a little bit more on the right side. He says, are your rosy predictions based on reality or the November election? I'm like, whoa, this is juicing up right here. This is good. Like that's a great question, right? And so Steve Mnuchin replies, let me just start by emphasizing, first of all, that these numbers impact real people, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have a very bad second quarter. That's not very good. But Steve Mnuchin goes in to say that his predictions are based on 3 things in terms of why he thinks next year's going to be such a great market. He says the rate of reopening in a careful way based on talks he's had with other professionals and doctors and the confidence that he sees in our country.
Real quick, the reason why we're doing this stimulus bill, $2,000, everybody's like, that's a lot of money for everybody to get, you know. And it goes down if you make more than 100,000 and up. It goes down, you know, significantly over time or whatever. But the reason why is they want us to be able to have money in our pockets spending on stuff, because it's a cycle. If we don't got money spending on stuff, the places that actually are selling us the stuff goes out of business, and then that's when the economy starts hitting hard. So basically, they're trying to give us money so we can keep being able to take care of ourselves and spend money on things that we normally would spend it on, you know, so these companies don't run out of business and go into bankruptcy and all that stuff, and that's when the whole economy drops. But I'm just giving you kind of an overview of some of the things we talked about over the last couple of weeks with him and the government. All right.
country's ability to get a vaccine by the end of the year. So there are your three things: the reopening, doctors, and vaccines. Okay. Chris Wallace then talks a little bit about the food supply chain, to which Treasury Secretary Mnuchin says, I see the glass is half full, so he's an optimist. Great. But then Chris Wallace does one of my favorite things and pulls a quote from a Federal Reserve president, this time out of Philadelphia, and he quoted, this was Chris Wallace's quote, "If the economy opens up too soon and the virus spikes again," and then he's quoting the Fed, "not only would this be a health catastrophe, but it would reverse the recovery as well. If this happens," he predicts, that Fed Reserve president, a quote, "painful economic contraction of GDP in 2021 as shutdowns are reintroduced. Do you agree that there's considerable risk in reopening?" So this is kind of like, you got Treasury Secretary Mnuchin going, yeah, the second quarter is going to be bad, but I've got these optimistic outlooks. And Chris Wallace is like, well, your Fed presidents aren't saying that. They think there could be a painful contraction next year. To this, Mr. Mnuchin says, if we do this carefully, I don't think there's considerable risk. So this is kind of, his opinion. Okay. But this is where things get fun. Chris Wallace hits right on the note of stimulus and says, hey, if there's going to be another response from Washington, what's it going to look like? We're expecting Nancy Pelosi to introduce a phase 4. And then Chris Wallace says, but the president says, we're in no rush. We want to see what they have, referring to Democrats. We want to see what the Democrats have. We know this. We've already talked about that a bunch on this channel. Obviously, we know the White House is hanging out, waiting to see what the Democrats propose, and the Democrats are in talks with the Republicans and the president, pre-negotiating it. We got it. A lot of this is political posturing, but we want to get into the stuff that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin is saying here. So, Chris Wallace finishes off by saying, with 33 million unemployed, with Paycheck Protection Program money running out by the end of the month, with state budgets cratering rather, this administration is in, quote, no rush? He's kind of quite like slamming Treasury Mnuchin here. And then here we go, quote, we've spent a lot of money. A lot of this money isn't even into the economy yet. Let's take the next few weeks. I'm having discussions with both Republicans and Democrats to understand these issues. The president and I are having discussions with outside people and businesses. We just want to make sure that before we jump in and spend another few trillion of taxpayers' money, that we do it carefully. Then he takes a little pause and goes on, and then I quote him again, and he says, we're there to help the American people. We're going to be considerate. And if we need to help the American people in every, he put emphasis on the word every, in every aspect of this, I've said before, we're willing to spend whatever it takes, but whatever it takes needs to be done carefully. I mean, that's pretty good. It doesn't help that we're frustrated because it's like, well, where is that help? Like, let's get going. And we know we're waiting like anxiously here for a solid Monday, Tuesday to see what this new bill is going to look like, CARES Act 2. We know that the House is expected to vote on it this week, which means the Senate could be voting on this by Friday or next week, and it could be on Donald Trump's desk theoretically within 8 to 10 days max. It's probably going to take 2 to 3 times as long, but we'll see. Obviously, a big thing we know as well where Trump's coming from is, and Chris Wallace hits on this, is, quote, will you insist that a payroll tax cut be part of the next relief bill? And Chris Wallace sort of expressed concerns based on what some Republicans were saying that, hey, there are a lot of people saying the payroll tax cut does nothing for people who are unemployed. So Treasury Secretary Mnuchin actually responds to this and gives us some insight. He says, we're absolutely pushing for a payroll tax cut. It's an incentive to get people back to work. It's delivering money to the American public and to businesses in a very effective way, and that will be one of the components. You've heard Mitch McConnell talk about liability. We agree on that completely. That's in reference to the liability protections for businesses so people don't sue over these, over getting the Rona because they're going shopping at Hollister and then they sue Hollister. And Treasury Secretary Mnuchin says we completely agree with that. The Democrats have been asking for more money for states. We've been clear that we're not going to bail out states that have been poorly managed, but we're going to look at all of these issues. And Chris, let me just emphasize, all of these bills have had enormous bipartisan support. When we need to go back and help the American people, we will do this in a bipartisan way and make sure we get all of the things included. That's pretty optimistic in my opinion here. I mean, so far, every single interview I watch pretty clearly points in the direction of we're not going to hold back. We're just waiting for the Democrats to submit the bill. Then we're going to talk about it. Yeah, there are some things we have disagreements on, but the things we have disagreements on, it's not like they're not solvable. Like, they're minor. They're pretty easy to solve. So, to me, I'm remaining optimistic. This is good news for me. In the meantime, I'm going to keep sticking out.
Well, that's it, y'all, man. It's good news, man. We're going to get money real soon, it looks like, man. So, keep in tune. I'll keep you daily up with all the news. Money coming our way, man. Like, for real. Oh, man.
I'm the Urban Experience, where we do things the urban way. I'm out.